Don't worry, folks. Even if you don't know anything about Deep Space Nine, I'll still be explaining this in such a way that it's all gonna make sense. Season 2, Episode 6, titled Melora, Characters Introduced. That titular character, Melora, is an Elassian, and she comes from a planet that has extremely low gravity. That means that when she goes to places that use a higher level of gravity, like the Deep Space Nine station, she ends up being reliant on a mobility device, or some sort of special accommodation. In this episode, there are two characters I'm going to be focusing on. Melora, no surprises there, and Dr. Julian Bashir, the main doctor aboard DS9. There is another subplot in this episode, but it isn't of any major concern for the discussion here. We enter this episode seeing an electric wheelchair, with mention of how they aren't something that has been seen very much for hundreds of years. Star Trek heavily uses replicator machines, and it is mentioned how this wheelchair design wasn't even on file. Melora had to send over the design files herself. I find this a bit interesting. I mean, medical technology is quite extensive in Star Trek, but is this really to say that disability is so uncommon? I'm of the opinion that this is a boring way to write sci-fi. They are making a specific episode focused on disability, yes, but to bring such focus and attention to it implies that it is something rarely encountered. Yet, that doesn't really make much sense. There doesn't seem to be medicine in this universe that can cure all the negative effects of aging. So, what happens when you're elderly and need mobility assistance, but still want to travel the stars? Or, further, when you need accommodations due to your origins, like Melora? Or even just regular old disabilities that either can't be treated medically or which the person doesn't wish to treat. By calling attention to all of the things that must be done to accommodate Melora, we witness how DS9 isn't currently very accommodating. The chief engineer even mentions how they had to add ramps to many locations, and how even with the modifications Dr. Bashir has made to the wheelchair, which allows it to go over higher inclines than normal, there are still many places that Melora won't be able to easily travel to. It is implied that in part, these issues are either caused or amplified by DS9 being created by the Cardassians. This does make sense to some extent, as the Cardassians are shown to be relatively militaristic, and the space station was made to assist in the military occupation of an entire planet. As such, it may not be a situation which really breeds an inclusive attitude to engineering. Even still, the Federation has maintained control of the space station for around a year at this point, and has yet to make any of these changes previously. When the idea of using the transporter to help with mobility is mentioned, it is also stated how Melora had sent word that it wasn't acceptable to her. Dr. Bashir takes this moment to mention how, once her basic needs are met, she refuses any special assistance. He says how he finds her extraordinary, and when another character says how it feels like Bashir has known Melora for years, he says that feels like he has because he pulled and read all of her personal and medical files. Let's just take a moment to let that sink in. That feels really gross. When I was first watching this episode with my partner, I felt excited to see a DS9 episode that was going to tackle disability. I immediately felt put off when Dr. Bashir mentioned how Melora refuses any special assistance, though, because I thought that meant that this was going to be an episode where they have a character with a disability, but she has to perform the role of superhero in order to be respected. Once I actually met Melora, though, my opinion quickly changed. It's not that Melora refuses all special accommodations, or that she's especially extraordinary. She's just tired of all the BS. She's tired of people undermining her, or underestimating her, and she's tired of people treating her differently because of her disability. She says how these things aren't an issue until people make them an issue. She's used to being shut out of conversations that she feels should include her, and she says that she feels as though a medical opinion isn't necessary when determining her capabilities because she's perfectly capable of performing her duties. She also doesn't want to feel like people have to babysit her, and she's simply tired of all the ways in which it feels like people are constantly performing acts of ableism against her.
Ensign,
I simply object to being treated like someone who is ill.
I don't see anybody doing that.
Try sitting in the chair, Commander. No one can understand until they sit in the chair.
Melora says this with a grimace, her voice quivering through the delivery. The camera focuses on her teeth bared, the discomfort clearly evident. It then pans to Dr. Bashir, who clearly feels awkward. He looks sad, uncertain, and his eyes are cast down. He then looks away. He wants to look anywhere but at Melora, and doesn't want to acknowledge his inability to help. The camera then focuses on Station Commander Sisko for a moment. He stares forward, silent, his fingers laced together. Unlike Dr. Bashir, he doesn't have the same discomfort. We see him take a breath, as he simply waits to hear what else Melora is going to say, ensuring that she has the space to do so. Before I continue to show this scene, I just want to take a moment to appreciate the dead air present here. It is made immediately clear how emotionally fraught this moment is. I really appreciate dead air as a tool in general. People underestimate just how useful a few seconds of silence can be, how powerful it can be to focus on nothing else but the look on a person's face. The camera focuses on Melora again, and as she begins to talk, she lets out an exhale, which feels like something between a sigh and a single awkward laugh. A single sound that exemplifies the difficulty of having this conversation, the emotional turmoil that Melora must experience to have this conversation and ones like it time and time again.
I've been in one chair or another since I left my home world. My family gave me this cane. It's made from the wood of a garlannic tree. They had no idea what it would be like to live off-world in what you consider normal gravity. Only a handful of Elatians have ever left home. But I always knew that I had to be one of them. I dreamt about exploring the stars as a child. And I wasn't going to allow any handicap. Not a chair, not a Cardassian station, to stop me from chasing that dream.
You must feel a great deal of pride about everything you've achieved.
And I've achieved that, Commander, without being dependent on anybody. To be honest, I prefer to work alone. It's simply easier for me.
I am not comfortable sending you alone into the Gamma Quadrant.
Sir, I can focus on the job better. I can work at my own pace without being a bother to anyone else.
Lieutenant Dax will be going with you.
Yes, sir.
Melora looks simply defeated after this. The conversation was difficult for her, and it is clear that this is a conversation she has had with other commanders multiple times in the past. Melora has achieved so much, and yet it feels like she doesn't have the agency she wants. Like she must always be treated differently or assigned a babysitter of some kind, when all she wishes is that she could do her work and live her dreams without needing to be treated like some anomaly to be smoothed over, or an outlier to be rounded out. Just like how it has gone many other times, however, she doesn't get what she wants. She is assigned someone to work with her, and like she likely must often do, she has to accept it. She tries to do so in stride, but even still, this is clearly a moment of defeat for her. This is often what it's like when you have a disability. Your skills are put into question, and you spend most days feeling like the world was not made with you in mind. Commander Sisko had stated to Dax and Bashir that he would never let an ensign go out on a solo mission like this during their first trip to the Gamma Quadrant. But the struggle of living with a disability is that even when it's something that seems logical to others, it still ends up feeling targeted. How can it not when so often people are actively targeting you anyway? And so, even in situations where the denial of your request may seem reasonable, it ends up feeling like a personal attack, because you have to come to expect personal attacks, or risk being hurt even more frequently. Later that day, Dr. Bashir heads over to Melora's quarters. Dr. Bashir makes some idle comments and small talk, but after a bit, Melora says that if the doctor came here for an apology, then she does apologize. During some of the previous scenes, there were some moments in which he was a bit harsh towards Dr. Bashir, but I didn't feel the need to include them in full. Melora says that she didn't set out to attack Dr. Bashir personally. Bashir responds, saying,
I'm sure you never set out to attack anyone personally, but you do seem to attack a lot.
Bashir says this with a genuine kindness, care, and concern. His voice is quiet and gentle even. He is not here to reprimand Melora. He didn't even come here for an apology. He came here because he is the one who feels bad, but also because he realizes that Melora acts the way she does for a reason. When it feels like the world is always out to attack you, then you have to do more than simply act on the defensive. If you attack others, play on the offense, then it's easier to avoid being hurt. By shutting out everyone, never relying on anyone, the pain of being treated differently, like you're lesser, can be a bit easier to bear. When Julian says the line I quoted earlier, Melora's immediate reaction is to say that it is insensitive of him. But when Julian describes something along the lines of what I've written, Melora ends up agreeing that the way she acts and talks has become a bit of a defensive tool. And so, Julian takes this opportunity to ask Melora out to dinner. That was something he initially planned to do. He's interested in her, and also wants to get to know her better. Although, I will also say that Dr. Bashir is often put into this role in DS9 episodes. He's a habitual flirt, and whenever a woman is newly introduced as a character, Bashir is often chosen as a romantic interest for her. Or at least, whenever a romance plot or subplot is present, but that happens a decent amount of the time anyway. Regardless, they end up going on a date to a Klingon restaurant. Dr. Bashir just randomly orders things off the menu in Klingon. They all get plopped onto a plate, and by the end we have a plate filled with earthworms, what seems like some kind of seaweed, and what I think are apricot slices. Bashir seems to have no idea what he's getting into, but is ready to at least try something new. When Melora sees the plate, she simply says that she can't eat it, and while Bashir tries to say she should at least give it a try, Melora goes off in Klingon, having what feels like an argument with the owner of the store. The Klingon man smirks and smiles afterwards, taking the plate and just tossing it over his shoulder as he says, "I like a customer who knows what she wants," before plating up a new order. Melora turns to Bashir and says that there's nothing worse than half-dead Racht, after all. While that scene's amusing, it might be easy to write it off as unimportant, but I disagree with that initial assessment. I think that this scene shows an important theme that will be present in this episode. Dr. Bashir is willing to dip his toes into other cultures, but is ultimately pretty naive. Melora, however, is quite worldly and has previously immersed herself quite heavily in other cultures, showing that she's more willing to experiment and make things work, even when there are initial hurdles to overcome. In part, I can say this because I've watched the whole episode, and this scene is set up to illustrate this point and has later payoff. The next day, we see Lieutenant Dax, who is supposed to accompany Melora on the expedition to the Gamma Quadrant, heading over to Melora's quarters. Dax presses the doorbell a few times to no answer. At first I thought that Melora might have tried to go out on the mission alone, but when Dax gets the computer to locate Melora, and it states that she's still on the station, it's immediately clear that something is wrong. We cut to Melora, on the floor, unable to get up. The rig that she wears to provide her with some minor strength in the higher gravity is hissing, clearly having taken some damage in the fall. Melora immediately begins blaming herself, saying she wasn't paying enough attention, and that she tripped over the lip of the doorway. She wonders aloud what architect would design every doorway to have a raised rim, the answer to this rhetorical question being one who didn't consider people with disabilities. Melora laments the situation, worrying that she won't be able to make her trip to the Gamma Quadrant. She's embarrassed as well, describing herself as flopping back and forth like a broken toy. She didn't want anyone to find her like that, but she also didn't have the strength to lift herself up on her own. Bashir asks why she didn't wait for Dax, and she replies that she doesn't need Dax. If only she had paid attention. Melora wants people to know that they can depend on her, and that she's capable of doing things on her own. Bashir, however, wants her to realize that everyone depends on each other in space, and it's okay for Melora to rely on other people too. This is the issue at times. When you're constantly underestimated, it feels like you need to overperform in order to be considered worthwhile as a person. Even when it's hard, even when it's difficult, people with disabilities will feel a need to overperform their capabilities, and while I agree that people should feel able to rely and depend on one another, the modern world is often far less accepting and accommodating. Living with a disability simply feels like living in a hostile world most days. The next scene is a double setup scene. It sets up both that Julian knows of a procedure that may be able to allow someone who grew up in a low-gravity environment to have the strength to move around in a higher-gravity environment. And it's also a scene of Melora introducing Julian to low gravity. Interestingly, despite all their time in space, there isn't much time spent in low or zero-G environments on the show. Melora's quarters have been augmented to lower the gravity to levels that Melora would experience on her home planet. Once she changes the grav levels, she immediately shows her comfort and dexterity, flipping and moving around with ease. Julian is uncertain of how to control himself in low gravity, but with some prompting he pushes himself off and ends up tumbling awkwardly into the air. Melora goes up and grabs him. She says that most people are curious about what it feels like, but that it ends up making her feel like some sort of carnival attraction, so she tends to keep most people out. Julian is thankful for the clear sign here that he's actually been let in, that Melora has broken down the walls that she keeps around herself. They start to kiss and lightly float upwards, and as we see a cut of them wrapped around each other in zero-G, I can confidently say, they fucking. In the next scene, and also on the next day, Melora and Dax go out on their trip to chart some of the Gamma Quadrant. A bit into the journey, Melora turns to Dax and says,
"Do you think love can bloom, even on a battlefield?"
Melora turns to Dax and says, "Do you think there's room for romance in Starfleet?" Melora clarifies that she doesn't just mean a fling here, but long-term romance. The two of them discuss the topic for a bit. Dax says that while it's hard, it does happen. When Melora expresses concern about the differences in their species, humans and Elasian, Dax talks about two people she knew who actually breathed in two different kinds of atmosphere, and yet they still had a loving relationship that lasted for decades. The most that they could spend with each other in the same room without an Atmos suit of some sort was 40 minutes a day, and yet that was enough for them. Alongside other time spent with one of them in an Atmos suit, they lived a happy and loving life together. What is expressed as a bigger concern is actually the idea of a long-distance relationship. Melora thinks about what will happen when she completes her assignment here and has to travel somewhere else. Dax says that even though the prospect of a long-distance relationship is a difficult one, it's still worth pursuing. Even if it doesn't work out, it's ultimately better to have tried. Dax sums up this idea by simply saying, "Consider the alternative." After this, some time is taken to explore the ideas of Dr. Bashir doing a procedure on Melora, which would pump her with some chemicals and would alter her brain chemistry in a way that would, make her be strong now? Not super strong, but strong enough to easily move around in the gravity levels tolerable to humans and many other humanoid species, allowing Melora to ditch the wheelchair and cane and move unimpeded. They don't really explain how this works, but that's what they go with. Melora soon finds out that this is a kind of monkey's paw, however. In order to gain this change, Melora has to forgo low-gravity environments. She will no longer be able to switch to low-grav in her room, or visit her home world for lengthy periods of time, or else it will confuse her brain and make her lose fine motor controls. Right now, this is reversible, but Melora has a time limit of about half a week to decide what she wants. I do want to take a moment, though, to point out that Julian is doing human experiments. This is experimental technology that Julian is performing here, and he is just immediately going to human trials. It's even discussed multiple times how he could write a research paper about this. That's not how you do medical trials. This is not how this is supposed to work, and the implications of this are terrifying. But anyway, Bashir's focuses on thinking of this as something amazing. He says to her, "You let me fly for the first time. I let you walk. We're even." He says this with kindness in his voice and a smile on his face, but that just feels so extremely gross. He doesn't even really seem to understand why Melora would feel so conflicted about giving up her ability to enter low gravity if it means that she can walk unaided. Julian seems ignorant to the greater implications of things here. This ultimately feels fairly realistic, though, even if it's frustrating that this is the case. Doctors and medical professionals will often focus on the disability someone has and try to consider all the ways to treat it. They will also do the same for things that have been pathologized in general. This is why going to the doctor means you're going to experience fat phobia and body shaming for many people, for example. Maybe I'll be able to put my experience with fat studies to use in some other project, but for these purposes, I'm simply using it as an example. Someone's weight does not inherently imply health issues, just like disability does not inherently imply health issues. Doctors will pathologize these things and focus on treating them all the same, even to the detriment of their patient. As we come to the end of the episode, Melora and Julian have dinner together at the Klingon restaurant. While talking for a bit, Melora says,
I'm not going ahead with the treatments.
Well, you can always try it again someday if you change your mind.
I don't think I will. I like being independent. To give up everything I am to walk up on land. Well, I might be more independent, but I wouldn't be elation anymore. I'm not sure what I'd be. Besides, maybe independence isn't all it's cracked up to be. I kind of like how it feels to be dependent on someone for a change. And I'm glad you got me to unlock the doors to my quarters, so I could finally let someone into my life.
So am I.
Melora is emotional here, but sure of what she wants during this conversation. Bashir just seems sad and especially struck by this moment. This isn't what he was expecting, and it seems like this isn't even something he had considered as a possibility. The Klingon proprietor of this restaurant begins to play on an instrument and sing, coming out from his spot behind the counter. Julian seems like he wants to escape this situation, saying that they can leave if Melora wants, but she wants to stay and listen for a bit, and says that she wants to remember all of this. She grabs Julian's hand, and it seems as though Julian is trying his hardest to not make it brutally apparent how he feels right now. He tries to smile at her, maybe even tries to smile for her, but the smile is weak, faint, barely present, and has a depth of sadness behind it. It seems as though if Julian is not able to fix Melora, if Melora is still going to continue being disabled, then he simply isn't all that interested. Or at least, this is the implication of things, because we never see Melora again in the show. The actress playing her, after all, was a one-off guest star. And that scene is how the episode ends, with Melora being willing to work through these differences, and Julian being unable or unwilling to do the same. The logistics of disability and disability assistance devices are complicated. Further, there are many people who don't understand why a person may choose to not utilize technology that would theoretically aid them. One of the discussions of this that put things quite succinctly is the article, "I have one of the most advanced prosthetic arms in the world, and I hate it." I'll leave a link to that in the description if you want to read further about it. Many pieces of technology made for people with disabilities are clunky and janky. Prosthetic arms are often exceptionally heavy and hot and difficult to actually maneuver correctly. Cochlear implants are often bad at picking up sound well in crowded environments or a place with a lot of background noise. They only work best at a quiet place, often when you're talking to just a single person. The things that these pieces of tech do end up giving you is that your disability gets to be ignored to some extent. You begin to fit better into ableist conceptions of normal. And in those ways, you begin to get treated better as a result. But there are still issues here, obviously. People deserve the opportunity to experiment with these kinds of technologies, and deserve the chance to consider whether or not they are a good fit. However, people often end up having a kind of savior complex around these things. In the same way that Julian felt like he could save Melora by giving her the ability to walk in a higher gravity unaided, many pieces of media make it seem like the prosthetic companies can save people who are missing limbs by giving them a prosthetic. It often isn't this simple. Further, there is also a cultural component to things in many situations. For example, many parents are told to give deaf children a cochlear implant as soon as possible. However, due to the issues I already mentioned, this doesn't solve every issue, and listening and hearing in a school setting can still be quite difficult. Further, this means that the child is less likely to be taught sign language, and is less likely to be involved in the deaf and hard of hearing community. This means that these children will still experience many difficulties, but are also less likely to interact with the people who would most be able to understand their struggles. Worse yet, those children may not even learn the language that would help them interact with this potential source of community. Disability is often treated as some kind of outlier, or something that needs to be fixed. However, the issue is ultimately with society. Take, for example, ramps. Ramps are useful for people with wheelchairs, but they're also useful for people with strollers. Crosswalks that let you know when it is safe to walk with a sound or voice line are helpful for people who are blind, but also useful for getting your attention in general. Elevators, as another example, are helpful for all sorts of people. A world that is built with inclusivity in mind is one that makes life easier for everyone. Many people also experience disability in old age, and they should not feel shut out from life if that happens. It is boring to write sci-fi and fiction that ignores the constant reality of disability. Many people in general seem to wish to ignore it, even though it's a regular and common part of the world we live in. This is why the idea that we are all temporarily abled is sometimes used. While there is some friction surrounding the idea, I think it is important to consider just how frequently people require additional accommodations. Many people will have some sort of accident during their life that requires some additional support, and many people in old age do need those extra accommodations to be able to live out their life. And so, I not only wish for fiction that considers this, but for a real world to become one that is more accommodating. Until then, we will all try to do the things that make our life easier. Those little hacks and tricks and small changes. We'll learn the places with larger bathrooms, the buildings that have the best ramps. And through it all, we will hopefully find other people who are willing to accommodate us. regardless of what that looks like.